Hey, so these are the things you need to avoid in order not to get suspended on Amazon. So we're going to talk about these things, and if you run into these things, we're also going to mention if you get suspended, like how to get reinstated and get back to selling on Amazon. So this is the topic of the video. And today with me is David Miller. He's a lawyer. He represents Amazon and sellers, and he helps sellers with all sorts of these policy problems that occur. But David, why don't you introduce yourself to us, man? And then we're going to dive into the content.
Thanks, Vova. Hi, everyone. My name is David Miller. I'm an attorney. I'm the founder at the law office of David Allen Miller. And I represent Amazon and other e-commerce sellers in Amazon suspensions, which includes account suspensions and listing suspensions, as well as various intellectual property disputes and business law matters. So today we're going to talk about different things that can get you suspended on Amazon, how to avoid them, and if God forbid, if you do run into them, how to get reinstated.
Yeah, man, great to have you here today. I'm happy that we connected and we're doing that. I know that people are getting suspended all the time. Luckily, I've been selling since late 2016. I'm still on, never got suspended, and hopefully will never get suspended. But for those of us who get that sometimes, it's okay. There is some help. And if you get suspended, yeah, we can get help. But what can get people suspended, man, usually, or from your experience?
Right. So there's a lot of ways you can get suspended on Amazon. And one of the things I've noticed is the bigger your business gets, they say more money, more problems, right? So the bigger your business grows, the more potential problems that can arise. So the first topic it's called a business verification suspension. Now, used to be years ago on Amazon that this suspension almost always occurred when you first created an account. So if you created an account and Amazon didn't like your documents for whatever reason, say, one document didn't match another document or whatever the case was, it was mainly a new account issue. Now, that has changed over the years. And now this issue has arose also from older accounts. So basically at some point, it can be when you create an account, or it could be down the line years in when Amazon asks more questions. So I'm going to tell you what you need, what documents Amazon traditionally asks for, what they request in order to resolve the issue. So typically they'll ask for a business license, bill dated within the last 90 days. So that's a utility bill, right? So it could be a gas bill, electric, water, internet service, a bank statement, and a valid credit card on file. Now, when any information from, say, your credit card, say the name on the credit card doesn't match the bank statement or the utility bill, that's a problem. It may seem minor if you're new to the Amazon world, but to Amazon, everything has to match. So if the utility bill is a day or two older than the 90 days, or the company name or the address is different than the bank statement, you're going to get rejected. You're going to have a problem. So that's more for new accounts, but older accounts, what I've seen, where this comes up most is when someone changes information on their account specifically. So if you change your address, again, sounds very minor, but I've seen it happen so many times that I always tell sellers, unless you really have to change information, just don't do it.
Right.
So that's really, you just have to be really, really careful as far as with your existing account with changing information. And when you do create that account, a brand new account, be very careful that when you submit those documents, just make sure all the information aligns. Just, you can literally have it all on your table and pieces of paper. I know most people don't print hard copy anymore. For me, that still just works. That's just the easiest, but just double and triple and quadruple check to make sure everything matches.
And David, that's for example, for US sellers, right? That kind of makes sense. But for example, if I come from Israel, right? And we verified our account years ago. And sometimes I have questions from people who are starting to sell, they get these kind of problems. So I'm curious, for other countries, maybe you should have the English name on file there, because I believe you can ask that in your bank. Even here in Israel, we can ask, I think I have I'm not sure, I can't remember exactly, again, we did it years ago, but again, it should match, each document should match from what I understand the other one. And obviously, if you're a seasoned seller, then if you're changing something, then better don't change it in the Seller Central, because it just might get you suspended. So yeah, the first question is sort of for those who come from different countries, maybe how should it?
Yeah, so Amazon does accept other languages, but it's
Right.
not a full list. So I believe
Mm.
it's somewhere in the, I would say about 10 to 12 languages or so. It could be slightly less or slightly more. I don't know
Mhm.
the exact number, but there are certainly languages Amazon will not accept any documents in. So if your language is one of those on that list that Amazon accepts, you should be fine, but it's never a bad idea to have them translated, to have them in English. So if you can, I would recommend that because I've seen sometimes other languages are a bit more difficult,
Mhm.
even if Amazon says they accept it. So that's just what I would, what I would recommend. It's not a dead sense on Amazon if you submit, in a different language.
I understand, man. And David, about the other thing, like for example, if we need, I've been selling a few years, for some reason I need to change something, should I notify Amazon beforehand, like open a case, like, hey guys, I'm going to change my address because I'm moving from this place to another. So just don't suspend me, right? Is that the way to do it? Or?
Zach, that's going to be an overall theme here today. I would certainly do exactly what you just said. You reach out to Amazon seller support. You let them know that, say your business address changed, like things happen, right? You're allowed to change
Yeah.
your information. So what I find best is getting something in writing that you can show down the road is just the best resolution you could possibly have. I've seen lots of sellers who they do something over the phone. And then if their account goes down,
Mm.
we don't have anything to show that. There's nothing to look at, say like, look, Amazon said it was okay. So when in doubt, get it in writing.
All right, pretty cool, man.
Okay, so that was business verifications. Now I want to talk a little bit about related accounts too. So it kind of ties in to
What's
business
that? Sorry,
verification,
David, I couldn't.
related
Related
accounts.
accounts, right?
Related
Mhm.
accounts, right? So this is when you have multiple accounts. Now, again, I'm going to talk about how Amazon used to operate as far as these policies because some of them have changed over time. It used to be where you had to get approval to create a second account. That's just what it was. Now, of course, everyone doesn't always follow the rules, but that's what the policy was. Now, over time, that's changed. Amazon has lowered the floodgates as far as related accounts a bit. They don't require approval, but what they do say is that you have to have a legitimate business reason to create a second account. Now, the
Mm.
next question is always, well, what's a legitimate business reason, right? A lot of things can fall into that, and Amazon's policies can be vague. But one part of it is for certain is that if the products are in separate categories, that will qualify as a legitimate business purpose. So you don't need approval as far as Amazon's requirement. But as I mentioned with business verification, I would get it anyway. I've seen where even in certain situations where you ask for Amazon's approval to create a second account, they say sure, you're allowed to have a second account, and I've seen it suspended anyway for related accounts. So that obviously is not, the most settling feeling in the world, but I've been able to help sellers get reinstated. It's a lot easier when you have something to show. But overall, you want to make sure it's it's a legitimate business purpose. So it's separate categories, the accounts, and you want to make sure that the accounts are entirely separate. New bank, different bank accounts,
Mm.
different business names, different bank statements, different addresses. It's essentially like you're operating two entirely different businesses. Now, if you have approval, you don't need that. I would just, again, for me, I'm a bit more conservative, so that's how I would do it. You don't necessarily need another account. I always tell sellers, unless you really need a second account, it just can create additional problems. It's really all about reducing your risk. But if you want to scale up and you're in an entirely different category, you have the right to do it. Just be very careful with separate business information and make sure there's no crossover. That's what Amazon's worried about. Amazon's worried about sellers having multiple accounts and attacking competitors, if you will.
Right. So you're saying that we can have a few accounts or like a second account. Is it few accounts or a second account? Or like can you have
You
even
can have multiple. You can have
multiple?
multiple
Right.
accounts, but every extra account is something else you have to keep track of and
For
just
sure,
set,
yeah.
make sure you're not in violation.
And as you're saying, it's a good idea to have it maybe under the same name, right? Because that's you, right? If you have it as an individual, but then different category, different products, different bank account, even maybe registered in another sort of street
Correct.
or something, right?
Correct. The way it's done correctly is if it's separate everything, separate email address, separate company name, separate address, separate bank statements, all separate information. So that's best. Now, again, if you have approval, that's not required. It's just something I would recommend keep them entirely separate. I want to just touch on how to resolve it if your account is
Yeah.
suspended. You always have to provide a plan of action when your account is suspended on Amazon. So if it's for related accounts, these are one of the more difficult ones to resolve. You typically have to get the first account reinstated. So if you created account one and say it was a brand new account, you never even sold on it, and account number two, for example, gets suspended, Amazon typically wants you to reinstate the first account first. So if that was stuck in the business verification phase, that's what we touched on last topic. Now you're gonna have to provide all those documents that maybe Amazon didn't accept in order to free your second account, which could be the one that was, making all the money. So it can be really frustrating for sellers to have to reinstate an account that they don't care to use. But with related accounts, that's why I just believe it's so important to keep everything separate, and to just keep, real close eye on all your documents, just in case something like this happens.
Do you recommend sellers, again, I never experienced this, so I can't say myself, but obviously you're a lawyer, you do that, that's something you guys do, but if a seller says, okay, I don't want to do that, realistically, is there, I think for simple, basic things, it will be possible, right? But for example, generally getting reinstated alone, can a seller do that without help, so to say?
Absolutely. I always recommend to sellers to try on their own first. If it's something that some sellers are just scared to do it on their own because it's so important to them, so they hire someone else to do it. But I've had many sellers who try on their own, and they could try, several times, and it's just not working. So they want a professional to help them with it, maybe make it better. But yeah, you definitely can try and get your account reinstated on your own, for sure. I encourage it.
Well, I'll say from myself as a seller, probably because every day you lose money, right? You're not selling, you're losing positions as well on the algorithm. So for me, I would want to get back as fast as possible, right? Honestly, I could have tried to do it alone if I were to get in that. Again, depends on what would happen. If it's like, hey, you've changed the address, can you provide the right address? Okay, I think I could handle that, right? But then something more, I would probably use services.
Right. Yeah. It definitely depends on the topic. Inauthentic suspensions and use sold as new ones are known to be a lot easier to reinstate on Amazon, but there's some more difficult ones. It could be intellectual property. It could be related account. It could be, a forged document case. So there's some cases where, it doesn't necessarily take a professional. It's just a matter of, how much time you have, or, usually everyone wants their account reinstated yesterday. But yeah, you can always try and provide the plan on your own. And then if it doesn't work, or enough time goes by that you're like, okay, I think I need help here. It's really, it's really dependent on the seller, I would say.
Yeah, I understand, man.
I want to talk about forged docs very briefly. This is probably the hardest suspension to overcome. So related accounts is probably second or third, but forged docs is number one, and it's been this way consistently for years. It's exactly what it sounds like, Eric. Forged manipulated documents. If you provide either a fake invoice, a fake document, or manipulate it on your own, Amazon catches you. It's as close to, Amazon will never say you're blacklisted, but it's as close to being blacklisted on Amazon as you can possibly get. So I highly, highly, highly recommend to just avoid it. Don't do it, because if you get caught, the risk is not worth the reward. So if the Amazon's asking for an invoice, it could be for something very simple. Say you had a listing suspension and Amazon's asking for an invoice because they want to make sure the product's authentic, right? Happens every day on Amazon. Sometimes if it's somewhat of an important product, or maybe it's not, but the seller wants to have the listing back, say they don't have an invoice. Sometimes what some sellers will do is provide an invoice that's not genuine. Again, if Amazon catches it, it's a big problem. I've seen where there are certain instances where the invoice is not manipulated, it's not forged, but there are certain things that can trigger Amazon's bots to suspend it as for a forged doc. I'll give you an example. I've seen where a seller can write in handwriting on an invoice. It could be like a brief note or something that has nothing to do with anything, really, anything that Amazon would care about. I've seen that trigger forged document suspensions. Couldn't tell you why, but guess what my advice is going to be? Don't write on invoices or documents at all if you can avoid it. Number two, pricing. Amazon specifically says in their notifications that you can redact, you can cross out your pricing, which is fine.
Right.
Again, it's not common, but I've seen it happen enough times where I wouldn't recommend it. If you cross out your pricing, I've seen Amazon call that a forged or manipulated docs because they're seeing writing on it. Or maybe say if you use a black Sharpie, a black magic marker to go through it and it goes a little too far and maybe it touches the product description or something else. I've seen it triggered. So even though Amazon says you're allowed to redact pricing, don't do it. Amazon doesn't really care about your pricing. So just a quick few tips about how to avoid those. As far as getting reinstated for forged docs, again, it's going to be another plan of action. These are just, like I said, very difficult to overcome. But the way you do it is you have to be forthcoming. You have to be honest about what happened. So if you did submit, a document that you merely just crossed out pricing, you have to let Amazon know that. And some sellers don't even really know that that's what caused it. So they're like, I'm so confused. Like, it's a real document. I don't really know what else to say. And then after examining the document, I'll say like, this is why they're, this is what happened. Now, if a plan of action doesn't work, what I've also done in the past is I've contacted Amazon's counsel, Amazon's outside counsel rather, sorry, in order to resolve that, because sometimes Amazon's internal teams don't help. They're not, they can't provide that assistance. But if it's a very obvious case, then, I've gone to them and I said, look, Amazon flag the seller for forged docs. Clearly this wasn't. Take a look, here it is. So that's just something to be aware of. That's how you avoid it, and that's how you resolve forged doc cases.
Generally, from what I understand is, first, don't fake anything. Amazon says like, okay, if he probably did that once or something, they don't want us on the platform again. So it's sort of, as you mentioned, close to being on a blacklist. But sometimes it does happen because little small things that maybe a seller wouldn't know, or when we do that pricing crossing, because Amazon, as you mentioned, they actually say that, yeah? Because, for example, recently Amazon lost some of my products and they say, hey, please provide an invoice. You may cross out the pricing. I never did that because, again, I need to cross it. Either I don't know. I don't do that. But maybe somebody doesn't want Amazon to know. And for those who don't want, then you should be aware that, if you cross it maybe with a marker, as you mentioned, or any other way, something touches here and there, and then you send it and like it won't work. But what's interesting also, I think, David, is sometimes Amazon does not exactly say what's wrong. They're like, no, this is not good. This is not good. This is not good. But tell us what's wrong. But they sometimes don't, right?
They almost never do, actually.
Yeah.
They're never going to say, like, you were suspended because you crossed out pricing, and that's why invoices are fake. Like, Amazon's never going to give you that type of information. It's a question I've gotten for years and years, like, why can't Amazon just tell us? I don't really have an answer to that, other than the fact Amazon is so massive that, I don't think they have the time. I think on average, Amazon employees are maybe reading your plan of action for a minute or two top. So if it doesn't really pop, you have to tell them what's important. They don't care, that you have no income for weeks or months. They don't care that, any, emotional type appeals never seem to work. So I don't care that, if there's some sort of hardship or, horrible things, like if, there's, somebody, a death in the family, or, anything that, we're all human. So things happen in life, but Amazon does not seem to care. I've never seen any sort of emotional appeal work. In fact, sometimes when I'm reviewing seller appeals, when they hire me or they come to me for help, I've seen that where they talk about how great a seller they have been and how hard of a time it is. Yeah, it doesn't seem to really help, unfortunately.
Interesting point. I never thought about this. I mean, I would have actually, if I were to think about this again, I would say that it probably would work but again, because the people who are behind the screen on the other side, first, they're not aware of what it is to be an Amazon seller, which is pretty damn interesting job, and it takes time and all this, but they just got to go through that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they probably just have to do their work. So
absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely. So next, I want to talk about drop shipping suspensions. So this is something that Amazon's been cracking down on for a long time. It used to be where there were tons and tons of drop ships. I'm talking just a few years ago. There's still plenty of them out there, but way, way less than there used to be. The main issue Amazon has is Amazon wants sellers to be the seller of record. You're allowed to technically drop ship on Amazon. What you're not allowed to do is simply have a third party retailer ship a product for you, and Amazon doesn't want anyone else to be the seller of record. So let me just kind of unpack that a bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're not the seller of record, or if anyone other than you appears on packing slips, invoices, external packaging, that's a violation of Amazon's dropshipping policy. A big one is Walmart. A lot of sellers use Walmart, so they never touch the product, right? Once Amazon orders a product from the seller, Walmart ships the product directly to the seller. Now, if Walmart isn't unpacking the product, which they aren't, the seller is going to see that it's coming from Walmart. Amazon doesn't want that for a few reasons. One, it causes confusion for the Amazon customer. They're not sure who the product is coming, from,
Yeah.
and it can be an issue with returns.
Mm.
And another is, if you don't have the product on hand, it just can be very delayed. If you're drop shipping, the product, say, may not be in inventory at the moment.
Yeah.
So Amazon, of course, is very big on timing, right? That's one of the reasons Amazon, exploded, is because they were so customer centric and they delivered, quickly. And that's what customers want. So if you're drop shipping, often you'll have an issue at some point with your shipping times. So those are just big problems.
Mhm.
So basically, you need to make sure that you're the only one identified in order to not run afoul of the rules. You need to remove anyone else that's identified, a third party dropshipper, or anyone else that's on the external packaging, the invoices, the packing slips, and you have to make sure you're the only one responsible for customer returns. So as far as resolving this, you have to make sure that you're within the dropshipping policy. If you're not, and there is some gray area too, but for the most part, if you're dropshipping, the benefit of it is these rules don't really work with. Because if you have to take the product yourself and then remove the invoice, remove some Walmart's invoices or different packing slips, it's not why most people get into the drop shipping business. They want it because they don't have to touch the product, and they don't have to order the product unless they get an order themselves. So I certainly get it, but those are Amazon's rules, not mine. But when you do want to resolve it, you have to let Amazon know, if you are within the policy, that you have complied. That you are the seller of record. Photos or any sort of evidence that you have certainly helps. And if you weren't, you have to, in your corrective actions or your preventative measures, right? Because there's three main components to a plan of action, right? It's root cause, corrective actions, and preventative measures. The corrective actions is how you fix it right now, and the preventative measures are how you're going to make sure it's not going to happen in the future. So if, let's say, you made a mistake where a Walmart invoice happened to sneak into one of the packages and you're pretty sure that's what caused it, it's best to just be upfront and honest, say that's not our business model, but we believe it, it did happen here. So that's certainly something that could help.
So like the basic dropshipping model, like the one when you just like order from, let's say, Walmart, ship it to an Amazon customer, does not work anymore. You have to relabel it. You have to make it seem like it's coming from Amazon, sort of, right?
You have to just make sure you're the seller of record, and
Yeah.
that you're responsible for the returns. So if the customer can tell that it's from Walmart, that's a violation.
I understand. And then as you mentioned in this plan of action, right, you have to, I believe you have to acknowledge it. You have to explain what you're going to do now and then what you're going to do in the future in order to avoid it, right? Something like that.
Correct. I'd say a main corrective action, or one that's used pretty consistently, is refunding a customer's money, telling them that you're sorry for, let's say it was a delayed shipment, which could also flag Amazon that this seller may be drop shipping. You spoke with your employees, you trained them, you let them know this is how, once we get the product, this is what we do to make sure we're not in violation of the rules. And as far as like preventing it in the future, is just staying on top of those returns, staying on top of your third party drop shippers to let them know. An agreement helps with that, to make sure it's like, okay, this is what violates Amazon's policy. This is what we need you guys to do every single time. And if not, our account could be at risk.
Mm-hmm. Understood, man.
Okay, so review manipulation, I want to talk a bit about. That was a pretty hot topic in the last month or two. So many customers everywhere rely on reviews, right? Whether it's on, everyone, whether it's an online store, whether it's Amazon, whether, you go get a haircut, everyone looks at reviews if it's the first time you've ever done it, unless it's just a referral. But well, I think I read that 9 out of every 10 people read reviews before they conduct business with somebody, which
Sure.
says, that speaks volumes. I know I'm one of them, and
Yep.
a lot of other people are. So Amazon has a very strict policy with reviews because so many people rely on it. So number one is you cannot offer any incentive for reviews. Okay. So that means any sort of discount, any free product, any compensation. So that's to the customer, right? So if I'm the seller and I sell you a product and you're the Amazon customer, I can't say down the line, whether it's right after, oh, I can say, I'll give you a 50% discount if you write me a 5-star review.
Mm-hmm.
Or I can't send you a second free product. Anything to incentivize, even if you don't ask for it, Amazon doesn't want it. Okay. No refunds for reviews. Say you're not happy. Say, I'll give you a refund, but write me this review, and I scratch your back, you scratch my back, sort of deal. No third-party services that offer discounts for reviews. That's a big one. I've seen a lot of sellers, in order to boost their sales rank, will, very honestly hire a third party to help them get more reviews so that they can, boost their business. What happens is even sometimes those their third party services, they may not always be aware, but you have to remember that you're going to be the one that has to deal with the consequences, right? So that's something that you have to tell them. What they'll often do is they'll send out automated messages, and they'll say things that are, if they're not in the gray area, they're just blatantly violating Amazon's policies. So just be very, very careful with what those parties are doing and what those emails are. I would ask them for if it's automated, what that automated email is. Don't insert any review request in a product in your box, in your packaging. That could literally just say, like, please write us a review. I wouldn't even do that, because
Mm-hmm.
if Amazon finds out, it's just not even worth it. If people are happy, you have to just kind of trust that they'll write reviews. Don't review any competitor products. That's a bit different, but that's, I think, somewhat obvious. If you're reviewing competitor product, it's very, very obvious what's being done there. So Amazon's worried about any sort of manipulation tactic. Lastly, of course, don't review your own products. As
Mm-hmm.
use a customer account, no family reviews or close friend reviews or anything like that. Again, Amazon wants genuine reviews. They're not incentivized in any way, and they want you to just be very careful. You have to be careful with third parties. Got to make sure remember, you're the one that's responsible. So you can't say, like, oh, point the finger at the third party service and say, oh, they did that. They were the ones. I had nothing to do with it. Amazon doesn't want to hear it.
I understand, man. And David, something I want to ask about this. So you're saying that pretty much don't manipulate reviews, if in one word, right? But what if we, for example, ask for a review in a neutral way, right? We send an email that says, "Hey, thank you for using our product." For example, we're selling barbecue-related products, so thank you for using our, for example, grill brush. Then we would be happy to hear from you, and could you please leave us feedback? Without any good, bad feedback, and or we use obviously there's these days there's the option to click on a button on Amazon, which Amazon provided us with, and that's an automatic email, right? That's through Amazon itself, so I believe that's legal. But if we use our own email, can we ask a neutral voice, or you still recommend get out of there, not to?
It's just something I would stay clear of. I
Yeah.
definitely wouldn't put it in the product packaging in any way, like
Mm.
with your product when it's shipped out. That Amazon's pretty clear is a violation. As far as what you mentioned, clicking through Amazon's internal system, that's probably okay because Amazon is,
Yeah.
it exists. You just have to be really careful with what your message actually is. Like I said, it's really a matter of like your level of risk. Just anything that you do, just make sure you have some sort of defense. If you're asking for a review for something else in exchange for something else, that's always going to be a problem. You're less likely, of course, to run into a problem if you're just saying, can you leave us a review? Or, thank you so much for your order. We'd love to hear from you on your
Yeah.
feedback. That you shouldn't have a problem. These are just circumstances that could come up, and just line by line Amazon's policies. So again, just be very careful. If you're not sure and it's something you're going to do hundreds or thousands of times, you can always just ask an Amazon expert. You can ask a lawyer. You can ask me. It's just you'd rather get ahead of it. I'm always one who I'd like to just know before I do something like that.
Yeah.
Just helps me sleep at night, I guess.
And how do we get reinstated if we did that sort of thing and we got caught for that? What happens then?
Okay, so review manipulations used to be very tough. They're still on the tougher side, but I've seen sellers. I've witnessed plenty of sellers that are able to get reinstated for this. But it really depends on what the circumstances are. If you're blatantly offering free product, it's a little bit tougher. But I've seen sellers in similar situations where they provided a discount or they'll just kind of send out a review request and it can cause problems. But again, you're going to have to provide a plan of action. You're going to have to tell them what caused it. And if there are any possible reviews that may not be genuine, Amazon deletes them. You have to let them know, like, okay, I offered a 15% discount. I'm never going to do it again. Or I used a third-party service. I didn't know they were doing this. I checked with them. They weren't honest, or whatever the case may be. And then you have to say, I terminated the services with that third-party service. I'm never going to do it again. I don't ask for reviews anymore. I just, I wait and see.
Right.
So I want to talk, can't talk about Amazon without intellectual property. So this is a pretty big topic. I'm going to keep it relatively brief. There's four main areas, right? So counterfeits, trademarks, copyrights, and patents. So counterfeits, very simply put, you just have to thoroughly vet your suppliers, right? So if you're, especially in such an online world, there's suppliers out there that people never barely speak to anymore because they're just ordering online. You have to just look them up and make sure they have an online presence. That's like a big one. I've noticed that if the supplier has no online presence and you have to provide invoices at some point, Amazon's just not going to accept them. They want to see who you're buying the products from, and if the price is too good to be true, you have to always wonder, it usually is too good to be true. So you just have to be really careful. Review the invoices. Make sure, you ask them to send you a sample invoice even before you make a purchase. If you're not sure about it, ask someone who maybe is more experienced in that area. It doesn't have to be a lawyer necessarily, someone who's, can you verify who the supplier is? If you don't know anyone who's bought products from them, they don't have an online web presence, but the likelihood that the products are genuine are I would say are pretty unlikely. So you just have to be really careful. And then as far as trademarks, you just have to really, I'm just going to talk about, I'd say, main topics that sellers run into here. And really just throughout all of intellectual property, there's too much to cover as far as, the whole globe. A main issue I would say is just avoid using well-known brand names in your listings when you're not selling that brand, right? So there's some confusion here with when you can and when you can't, but in general, you have to ask yourself, does this create confusion to the source? Is there some sort of confusion about what's actually being sold? So if you're using a term, that's a well-known brand, right? You could have a problem. So you just have to be very careful. Now, you can use what's called descriptiveness. So when you're merely describing something, so I'll give a couple of examples here. If you're selling ice cream and you call and you use the term cold and creamy, or you're selling a TV and you call it crystal clear, right? There's a brand that's registered that's called Crystal Clear that sells TVs possibly, right? But the defense is, I'm just describing my product. Okay, I'm saying it's a crystal clear TV. So that's the defense. So in those situations, they're really case by case. So it's of course not, one size fits all. But when you're using any sort of well-known brand name, you just have to be extremely careful. If you're not, you can be suspended for it.
David, I just want to add to that. I used at some point at one of my listings, we said something like for life, lifetime warranty. So I know that generally lifetime warranty is a bit problematic with Amazon, but for life. And all right, so the number 4 and then a life, so it's it's kind of memorable is the right word. Yeah. And then one day there comes a letter from For Life, hey, you're using our brand name. Okay, sorry, we're going to change it. We didn't even know. But that came through Amazon itself. And they just say oh no, actually they suppressed the listing, right? So they suppressed it, we changed it, got it back, no problem. So that was my case.
Right. Yeah. So that sort of situation happens all the time. So that's that's one where they don't necessarily have a very strong trademark there from what it sounds like.
Hmm.
But because people will use that term, for life. That's a pretty common one. Probably use that for lots of different products. But yeah, it's exactly that sort of situation. But if think to yourself why you're using it. If you're using it because you want, you're not selling that actual brand, and you're just trying to get as much traffic to that listing, that's when you can have a problem. Same thing with when you're using it in the URL, whether it's your listings. So you just have to really review. That's when, as far as when you're creating your listings, when you're joining them, again, extremely careful with what you're joining. Sometimes they're just bad listings or ones that are incorrect, and that's what causes problems. So you have to remember that if you join it, you're just as responsible. Copyright, very briefly, three main areas that Amazon sellers typically face: photographs, verbiage, and designs are the three biggest areas as far as copyright issues on Amazon. If you're taking it from somewhere else, it's the only way, like the easiest way to describe it is if you're taking an idea from somewhere else, or if you see a photograph or you copy a paragraph or several paragraphs, as far as it could be an instruction manual, for example, or you see a design of a product that you're like, oh, that's a cool design, and you make a product that looks exactly like it. Those are those issues are always present on Amazon. Those are the three main ones on copyright. I wrote a copyright blog. I could circulate it to you afterwards, and maybe we could
I'll link you in the description. Yeah.
Yeah. So, it kind of goes through step by step, kind of how to resolve copyrights. I literally give, I think, 5 or 6 steps from when you get the complaint to how to resolve it and the different options you have. So I'd highly recommend that. And lastly, patents. These are probably the most difficult. These are, as far as inventions go, if it's your own product and you got the idea from somewhere else, you need to make sure there's no patent registered. Okay, so you can try and do that on your own. I'd recommend contacting a lawyer. Of course, that's up to the individual seller. If it's not your own product, you're buying it from a manufacturer or some sort of distributor, you should ask them if they have a patent on it. Because if they don't, and let's say the product looks unique, possible somebody else does, and you could have an issue. So there's lots of patent issues on Amazon. There's design patents, there's utility patents. These are the most complex out of all the different areas of intellectual property. So very case by case basis. So that's, those are some of the main issues and the way you can resolve those types of disputes. Anything else before I hit the last topic?
Yeah, but how do we reinstate it? Again, it seems to be either we try on our own. For example, for me, we did not get suspended with this for life. They just suppressed the listing, so we had to change it, and that's fine. But yes, if we were to get suspended, then again, if Amazon would say, okay, you've used that brand name, then I could try to do that on my own, just change it, explain to them again, I won't do it again. I didn't know, honestly, like here it is, I'm not using it anymore. Of course, patents, as you mentioned, it's possible just to search it through UPSTO, that's called, right? Or it's a US place for patents. But again, I did that sometimes, and it's a bit hard to navigate there at times because there might be patent for the usage of the product or the design, right? So it's kind of hard to understand. So I think here it's better to talk to a lawyer, in my opinion. And yeah, and as you mentioned, some maybe package designs, as you mentioned, or some logo maybe, or something that's similar, something you can get sort of suspended for that, then yeah.
Yeah, so for all of them, for all 4, copyright, trademark, counterfeit, and patents, the first thing you always have to do is reach out, not have to do, the first thing you should do is reach out to the rights owner. Whoever filed that complaint is someone you want to be in contact with, okay? You have to review the listings yourself to see what caused it, the product. Sometimes it's very simple, like you can identify it in, 5 seconds. You can identify it immediately. Other times, you may just be at a loss. You have no idea why it was filed. Trademarks and patents, they almost always give you the registration number. So you can look up on the USPTO the trademark number or the patent number. Copyright, almost never. I almost never see the copyright registration number on there. Now, why Amazon doesn't provide it, no idea, but they never seem to. So those, I've noticed that more sellers are scratching their head because they don't know what they're comparing the product, unless they specifically took a photograph from somewhere else or copied, some sort of verbiage somewhere. It's very difficult to find, and the U.S. Copyright Office, the website is not exactly user friendly either. So again, my blog kind of describes where you can look and how to go about doing it.
Yep.
But first step is always to contact the rights owner. So for copyright, for example, even if you don't have the registration number, you can reach out and say, what's going on here? Like what am I infringing upon? Can you elaborate on the basis of your complaint? So that's how you go about it on that front. And then if they don't answer, or say they give you a position that you don't agree with, you can always file what's called a DMCA, counter notice. Digital Millennium Copyright Act is what DMCA stands for. If you file that with Amazon, Amazon's supposed to reinstate that content within 10 business days. They're supposed to automatically. Once it's filed, the other side, essentially what that does is start a clock. That this is only for copyright, by the way. When the copyright owner receives notice that a counter notice has been filed, that copyright owner has 10 business days to file a lawsuit. If they do, of course, you're in court. So there's a risk associated with filing that counter notice. If they don't, Amazon is supposed to reinstate that content within 10 business days. So that's a very classic situation that comes up. What are the risks associated with it? Is it worth submitting a counter notice? Because there is risk involved. Again, as far as overall with IP, copyright and DMCAs aside, you can also always appeal it. That's much lower risk. If the rights owner you can't get on the same page, your situation, you're able to resolve it directly with the rights owner, that's great. But if you're not, you can always appeal it and argue for whatever the situation is. If there's some gray area there, you can always make an argument.
I understand, man. And what's the last point, David? What you mentioned?
Last point, it's just Inauthentics and You Sold This News. I just wanted to touch on it very briefly. Again, these are just issues that come up. They're usually relatively minor and they're not super difficult to resolve. Ways of just avoiding it, again, you have to make sure you're thoroughly vetting your suppliers, making sure there's an online presence and that they have legitimate invoices. And you have to also just consistently monitor your customer messages, right? Especially negative feedback. So if someone has an issue with the product, say it's expired or it came damaged or whatever the case may be, it's very likely that other customers either also have the problem or may have it in the future. So you have to don't ignore those problems because they could become bigger ones and it could lead to listing and account suspensions. Lastly, just review your entire listings before joining them. Make sure your product matches exactly what's being sold. I've seen lots of confusion in the past. It could just cause lots of issues. If it's another brand name, if there's compatibility issues involved, just have to review thoroughly, make sure it's what you're actually selling. And hey, if listing goes down or your account goes down, you can always submit a plan of action, explain what happened, provide the root cause, what caused the issue, corrective action, how you fixed these specific issues, and then preventative measures, how you're going to prevent this issue from occurring in the future.
Pretty cool, man. I'd also add that for the first point where you mentioned, or maybe you have damaged products or you had expired products. So it's good to do product inspections always for sellers. We do it each time. In the past we didn't, and even if you have good relationship with a supplier, sometimes for years and years, it's not exactly the sales rep you're talking to, right, that you became friends with, and that's pretty awesome, but just people in the factory might have screwed. And it happened to me. We had an order some grill brushes and some of them were sort of damaged, right, and it never really happened before, but luckily we did check that specific time, and I think from an order, I can't exactly remember, 5,000, there were 100. And that's a lot. 100 is a lot. That's a lot. That's potentially 100 bad reviews, 100 negative feedback, all this. So yeah, inspections. And first, thank you, man, for coming today. Really interesting topics, many of them. And also in the beginning, viewers will see we have timestamps for each. So if people are searching for something specific, also, where would people find you, man, online? How can they best? Of course, we're going to have your blog post that you mentioned, link in the description to read more about this and generally see other things. But where else, man?
Sure. So email address, you can contact me at David, David, at damlawfirm.com. And that's my website, damlawfirm.com. And my phone number is 516-313-1572.
We're going to have these in the description also, and maybe appearing here on the screen on the post-production. Man, thank you for these really interesting things. Kind of to sum it up, just for our sellers watching, just kind of stay white hat. Like before you do something, check it, as you mentioned, right? Be a bit more conservative here, right? Like don't rush too much, check things. And if something happens, see what happened, take it easy. Maybe if it's so real easy and you're not in a rush and you see that you can actually get yourself reinstated within a day or two or something, do it, I'd say. But again, if you're in a rush and have volumes that are really huge and every day is like you have people on payroll, et cetera, then maybe it's good to contact a lawyer. For example, you can talk to David, or just do your due diligence, talk to different people. And yeah, I mean, thank you, man.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Sure, man. Have a great day. Hope to see you here again.
Definitely. Take care.